to a few mini TED Talk style talks that you'll be able to experience this morning. And the first one will be with Rosella Pagliuchi-Lor, who is the Director of External Relations at the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Please welcome.
Good morning, everyone. So here we are to talk about refugees. 2016, the Olympic a team enters the Olympic Stadium in Rio de Janeiro, and it's carrying not a national flag, but a flag of the International Olympic Committee. Let's see if that works. I think I'm going to need a bit of technical assistance because I wanted to show you the pictures, actually. Oh, yes, there they are. OK. So there they are. And these are a group of young people united not by nationality, but, oh dear, well, but by the fact, the common experience of having had to flee to save their lives. The refugees who came in they also had a shared experience of having well, it seems to be going by itself, by the fact of having had some of their most important athletic successes outside the sporting arena. They were the Yusra Mardini, a Syrian swimmer, plunged into the waters of the Mediterranean to pull the boat with 20 people on board. And she pulled it along with her sister to safety. She swam for over 3 hours to do so. Yolanda Manila fled as a 10-year-old while her village was being attacked, and in the chaos lost her family. She flew for 3 days through the bush until a kindly stranger picked her up and took her to a camp. The crowd that was cheering them on saw them for what they were. Young people who had overcome incredible odds to be there. They didn't see them as job stealers, as people who had come to steal, to dodge, and to take advantage of our welfare system. They didn't see them as security threat. They saw them for the extraordinary young people they were. They were refugees. They are refugees still. And let me give you a little bit of context of what a refugee is. There are in the world today about 67 million people who have been forced to leave their homes. 2/3 of them remain within their own countries. We call them internally displaced. About the other third, about 22 million of them, have fled crossing borders, and that makes them refugees. Contrary to what we are hearing sometimes, it is not true that refugees are all trying to come to Europe. About 86% of them remain in neighboring countries in the global south, and often living alongside populations who already have very little access to services. Refugees are also no longer mostly living in camps. Following the general trend towards urbanization, more and more refugees are now living in urban areas alongside the local poor or in settlements. Finally, let me also say something else, that while humanitarian budgets have been growing constantly, they just cannot meet the needs. And while the combined effect of humanitarian assistance, local communities' generosity, and the refugees' own resourcefulness means that, by and large, nobody dies, the reality is that today, somebody who becomes a refugee today looks at about 20 years as a refugee. This is a very important statistical number, because it means that, for example, a child's future will be wasted away in a situation in which there are no real prospects for future. And this is perhaps the worst that can be said about the refugee experience, is the fact of being stuck in a kind of a twilight zone without prospects for future. So children are particularly vulnerable to this. Many of the children that we are seeing today are children who have been witnesses or directly directly victims of extreme violence, children who have witnessed their parents being killed, children who have seen their world being upended. Many of them are deeply traumatized. Children are also in exile. They live the constant anxiety of seeing their family struggle and having a keen sense of their own future slipping away. Think that refugee children have far less access to education than the normal population. Only about 6 out of 10 have access to primary education, and only 2 out of 10 have access to secondary education. If we talk about tertiary education, of course, the number goes even lower, maybe 1 out of 100. So, despite all of that, and let's see if I can get this to work, despite all of that, the refugee children are incredibly resourceful. And wherever you are, after a while you will see kids play. Whether it is using the side of a tent as a slide, or building toys, or creating other opportunities for entertainment. But sport brings a different dimension, and this is what we're talking about here. Sport is, if you wish, organized play, and it comes with benefits that cannot be replicated by spontaneous play. Let me tell you about Dadaab. Dadaab was, about 15 years ago, I was in Kenya. And Dadaab was then, like today, the largest refugee camp in the world. In those days, it was even bigger. Today, it's about 200,000 people, so what is it, about 5 times the population of Monaco? And the population is mostly Somalis. It's a rather conservative society that, as it is often the case, becomes even more conservative in exile. One of the challenges that we had was trying to persuade families to send girls to school and to keep them there. Because, of course, refugee girls are overprotected, but also because since childhood, they have to help their families. One of the things that came up was the question of sport. Well, the girls certainly did want to have sport activities, but the community didn't think it was really quite appropriate. We had incredible lengthy negotiation with the various groups, imagine sitting 48 degrees, in the camp, trying to persuade them that this was good for the girls. Finally, we managed to whittle down the objections to what they should be wearing, and tracksuit did not seem to be an acceptable get-up for the girls. So what you see there is bespoke sports gear that was developed with the assistance of Nike. It consists of a head covering and an ankle-length tunic with trousers underneath. The tunic has a coulisse, which allows the skirt to be hitched up, as you see with the girl who is wearing the white one at the back, so that they can run. And of course, we also had to provide a complete cover around so that boys couldn't see the girls playing. A rather complex arrangement, but it has allowed the girls to play. And now, years later, I'm told that there are regular leagues, girls' leagues in sport in Dadaab, and the softball team is doing really well. And the parents, and that's more important, take pride in the achievements of their daughters. So this is a way in which sport has allowed the girls to crack that door a little bit more open. Think about societies in which girls are being taught from early childhood to be self-effacing and invisible. And think about the mindset change that comes when girls are taught to stand tall and hit that ball with all their strength. It's more than sport. It's really a mindset change. Sport does something else. Sport provides structure, provides predictability. Many children need predictability and structure to grow. But refugee children have often seen the world the world becomes incomprehensible. When your world is completely broken down by violence and by the experience of having to leave everything you know. Yolanda, who fled, the girl who fled for 3 days in the bush, when she got to the camp, met with someone who was giving judo lessons. She says that judo saved her Because lost as she was, having lost her family, being among strangers, imagine a little kid. I can't imagine myself, 10-year-old and running for 3 days on my own. And when she did, she found someone who took her under his wing, taught her judo, and judo became for her that center, the ground, the foundation upon which she was able to rebuild her life. So, and finally, sport is also what builds community, what makes groups into teams. It provides that sort of sense of belonging that many refugee children miss. Don't forget that even when you have crossed the border and you are supposedly in safety, well, safety has different shades. And for example, in refugee camps, very often, families end up living with cheek to jowl with communities that are not their regular neighbors, they're not their accustomed neighbors, sometimes even hostile communities. There's a lot of negotiation that has to take place to ensure cohabitation. Or when they live with local communities are both generous and welcoming, but sometimes also resentful, because refugees are seen as coming and competing for resources that are already very scarce. So the opportunity of sport activities that bring together youth from the refugee and the local community are extremely valuable. They're a way of building, again, the fabric of a community that can function in a peaceful manner. We strongly believe at UNHCR, the refugee agency, that all children should have access to education and to sport. That is really the necessary complement of a good child development. As it is, of course, sport is only available to a very small number of kids, perhaps 10%, maybe. But there are good news. And the good news are that, first of all, last year, 193 states came together and made a formal commitment in New York to look at refugee crisis in a somewhat different manner, by focusing on solutions from the beginning, so trying to cut that those 20 years, and to support local communities alongside the refugee community, linking up humanitarian assistance and development. The idea is a whole of society approach in which not just the usual suspect, the UN, the NGOs, but also civil society, association, sport association, private sector, business, all come together to try and bring about an overall improvement for the life of all the community, local and the refugees together. And in so doing, giving greater possibility for self-reliance and for a more meaningful life, access to services, access to education to everyone. There is a growing interest in the sport world to engage with refugees. There is a growing understanding at large that sport isn't just about records, but it is about something much more substantive and much more deep in terms of education and full development of the person. We have growing partnerships. Well, Peace and Sport is one, but there are others. There are various federations that are working with us, and of course the International Olympic Committee that is just in these days launching a foundation called Refuge that will aim to assist, to bring sport to refugee children and other marginalized kids. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a lot of work to be done. Of those 22 million refugees that I mentioned, well over half are kids. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it can be done. It can be done, and we can together help give these kids a better future for themselves and for the communities of which they are part. And I do hope that you will want to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rosella. That was amazing. Our next speaker is
part of this.
Thank you very much, Rosella. Our next speaker is Irina.
That you will want to be part of this.
Thank you very much, Rosella. That was amazing. Our next speaker is Irina. Thank you very much, Rosella. That you will want to be part of this. That was amazing.